Hi, welcome to Bookmark. I'm your host, Don Noble. Today's guest is fiction writer Michael Knight, author of a novella, 2 novels, and 3 collections of short fiction. His latest collection, Eveningland, is composed of 8 stories, all set around Mobile Bay, and nobody knows the culture, social mores, and values of Mobile better than Michael Knight. I spoke with Michael Knight during the annual Alabama Writers Symposium in the Old Courthouse Museum in Monroeville, Alabama. Michael, it's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
I've enjoyed your new collection.
Well, thank you.
And your new collection has brought you the Truman Capote Prize. And we're sitting here in Monroeville, and you'll be getting it tonight.
I'm excited, man. I'm honored, and it's a privilege to be here with you.
Is Capote a short story writer? Has to be a Capote short story fan.
Yeah, well, one, just in terms of quality of short fiction, there are hardly any writers who are better than Capote. But the thing that is most amazing to me about Truman Capote as a short story writer is his versatility. He could unsettle the reader with stories like Miriam or Tree of Night. He could do sort of earned sentiment in a story like Christmas Memory, which my mother used to put that book, maybe she still does, bring it out and put it on the coffee table, in the holidays. So that's particularly personal to me, getting this award. But he could do, like first-person Southern twang. He could do luminous third-person. He could do, we were talking about this earlier. He could do a sort of cosmopolitan near minimalism. He could do almost anything on the page. It's amazing.
He was amazingly versatile and amazingly talented.
Yeah, no doubt.
And I think it's high time, in fact, that Alabama and Monroeville in particular paid as much attention to Capote as to anyone else.
Me too. I'm on board. I'm on board.
Your new collection is, you're a Mobilian, and we had a conversation years ago in which I said I had looked not in a nosy way, just in a casual way. It turned out you were, of course, like 42nd generation Mobilian, and your family has been lawyers and judges, right?
We got some lawyers in there for sure. I don't know about judges, but we got lawyers for sure.
But you escaped the law.
At the banquet tonight, I'm going to thank my parents for not insisting that I go to law school. I grew up in Mobile, and all of those people that you're referring to are still in Mobile and will never leave. I was the only one who escaped, but I didn't get very far. I got as far as Knoxville, Tennessee, and that's about it. I mean, Mobile's a place that stays with you.
For a Mobilian, Jackson, Alabama is a long ways.
Yeah.
I mean, the radius of where it's acceptable to be is quite short.
Well, that's one of the things that is sort of interesting about Mobile. There is, especially among the particular tribe of people that Eveningland is addressing, there is a kind of pride of place that I think you don't always find, and I think some of that comes from genuine, wonderful things about Mobile. It's a beautiful city. Most of my family grew up down on the water around Dog River, and that was a beautiful place to grow up. It was, it was as good a childhood as anyone could have, but I also think there's this thing about Mobile that comes from being a kind of second city, that they're the sort of second most glamorous city on the Gulf Coast. New Orleans is always the jewel of the Gulf Coast. And so I think there's like an exaggerated pride, about in Mobilians that I think is sort of great. It's comic and wonderful, and but it's true, of Mobilians. They always feel in the shadow of New Orleans.
It causes Mobilians never to fail to tell you that Mardi Gras started.
I knew that's
in
where
Mobile.
you're going. Yeah, you can't be in the presence of someone from. It's in Eveningland. I mean, you can't be in the presence of someone from Mobile for half an hour before that comes out. Yeah.
Well, you are an expert on that culture, and in particular, if there's a stratum of that culture, call it lower, upper middle, right in there. Right. Those people are your subject. Your stories are very short on slums. they're short on blue collar mostly. These are stories about a kind of respectable, solid, professional class, usually citizen of Mobile. I read your story, the first story, Oil and Water. I read the title, I read the story, and it wasn't until afterwards. Really, it was a little while later, and I thought, oil and water, wait, they don't mix.
Okay, well, I don't know what that means.
Well, no, you have the boy.
Yeah, and the girl.
And the girl who's
the actual
a
oil,
little
the actual water.
trashy. You have actual oil and water.
Right.
I got that. But then moving along, I thought, this couple can't be together. It's not appropriate. Even though his father only owns a marina and is not a judge, still, he's solid business class. And as the narrator tells us, she's a little trashy, isn't she?
Yeah. So are you asking me to talk about that particular culture of Mobile, or to talk about how it functions in the book, or
in that story, they shouldn't be together.
Yeah. Well, a narrator in another story says about the characters in the collection that these are the quote, and it was written with gentle sort of irony, that these are stories about the right kind of Mobile family.
Yes, right.
And I think that element of culture is still true in Mobile to an extent. There's a sort of underlying question here. Maybe this is not where you were going, which is someone asked me this question. Has asked me this question once when I was on stage, which is basically, why bother writing about these rich white people? You know what I mean?
Well, that's ridiculous. It's a silly question.
I agree, it's a silly question, but but there is a non-silly answer to it. And there's it's I think multi-layered answer. And the first one is, this is the world that I grew up in, and I say that with some embarrassment in front of certain audiences, but it's the world that I grew up in. And so if I have anything true to say about what it means to be a human being, then I've got to draw on these experiences.
Exactly.
And then the other parts of that answer go, loss is loss, and loneliness is loneliness, and love is love, and family is family, regardless of class and race and gender and ethnicity and slums or mansions. And I would even take that one step further. You can tell I've been waiting for a chance to give this answer. I didn't answer it so well when I was live on stage, but is that there are lots of great writers right now writing about returned Iraq War veterans, or young women growing up in certain neighborhoods of New York City, or Native Americans growing up in the Western U.S. Right. But I'm not the writer to tell those stories. If I'm going to contribute to this larger conversation about what it means to be a human being, then I've got to draw on the world that I know, and I think Eveningland does that as part of that conversation.
And you should. And every human being, has feelings. Even
agree.
well-to-do people.
They do. The poor well-to-do
have
people.
Feelings.
I do have the sense that there are certain readers. I think it's partly the political climate there right now. There are certain readers who sort of they feel like it's sort of difficult to sympathize with people who are not experiencing the problems of poverty or ethnicity, and Lord knows I sympathize with that opinion, but these are my people, and I love them, and I'm going to tell their stories.
Something else that's not in these stories, which we have to get away from what's not in them quite quickly now. But, but what else is not in them in terms of your being a Southern fiction writer is that we're not talking here about raising cotton either.
No.
We're not talking about plantations or slavery, or really not even about Jim Crow. These are white-collar, essentially urban and suburban people and professional class. The story that I think is subtle, that brings this kind of thing along, is Jubilee. It is Jubilee. Yeah. The man is 49, going on 50, happily married, has a son who's... there's a line in that story, knocked me out. His son has rebelled by joining SAE instead of the Deeks. Now, if that isn't
a minor league rebellion,
that isn't an upper middle class rebellion, I don't know what one would be.
Right.
But this man and his wife, they live on the boardwalk right next to the Grand Hotel. They're going to walk there to his birthday party, and they have this moment. And I know what I think is going on in their minds during this moment. What do you? Is it not a moment of reflection, a moment of
certainly it is
gathering up?
If you don't mind, can I back up a little bit
and
talk about that story?
Course.
So I set out with that story, just talking about sort of like what is available to a writer and experience and what can make a good story. I wanted to write a story about a happy marriage. I hadn't ever read a story about a happy marriage. I have a happy marriage. I have friends who have great marriages, and it seems to me that that's part of the experience of life, or can be part of the experience of life, and it ought to be a fit subject for fiction. But as a writer, I know that there has to be tension, in a story in order to give it any kind of drive at all. And so, even as I was writing about this couple, who I perceive as certainly loving each other and at least believing themselves to be content with their lives, more than content. They have a beautiful life, As the story progressed, and as they're sort of walking to the hotel for this 50th birthday party, well, anyone who's ever been married knows that that's a complicated relationship, right? And so a lot of that sort of started to bubble up underneath the sort of pretty elegant surface of the story. And so yeah, it's a moment of reflection. This is not directly on the page, but they're sort of considering, they're sort of taking stock of their marriage and considering what they've gained and what they've lost and how things have turned out the way they expected and how things haven't lived up to those expectations. And it's a big moment for them in the story. And one of the thrills about writing that story was I did not know what the sort of emotional content of that last scene was going to be until the last scene was being written. I didn't even know it was going to be the last scene. And so living inside that moment as a writer was it's the reason you write, sort of discovering the true heart of a story and feeling that emotion as you're writing it.
Right. That moment, I don't know. I can never tell what's willful. I don't think writers always know what little breadcrumbs they've stuck in there for somebody to notice. But he plays tennis on Saturdays, mixed doubles, but not with his wife. All right, my eyes opened. I thought, something here. And then he's late getting back from tennis on Saturday morning from the mixed doubles.
Right.
And then I thought, no, he's not actually having an affair. Michael is just playing with the reader here.
Well, maybe we can. The story, stories evolve, right? You start off with a sort of general notion, and you're exploring avenues that the story might go down in the earlier drafts, and one of those, the sort of obvious one, to generate tension and conflict, was that he might be having an affair, or she might be having an affair, or so I think what happens is, as you sort of wind away from that in discovering the true nature of the story, there's still those little seeds of previous ideas are left behind, I think, in interesting ways. Because that fear, like there's a moment in that part of the story where we're close to the wife's point of view, and she says deliberately, "I know all these other marriages that are coming apart, but my husband is always faithful."
Yep.
And there's something about saying that line out loud, or she doesn't speak it, but we're in her point of view, that suggests the possibility of its opposite, to the reader. So for sure, that's
the subject has been raised.
Yes, absolutely,
Absolutely. That's what happened.
And then it's in the back of your mind the whole rest of the story. Even though I do believe that he's faithful to his wife,
and I believe that they're going to be all right. But what we can't do, we can't read his mind exactly. He's standing there, and he's just finishing up half a century. And I think that what's going through his mind, among other things, is this it? This
sure,
pretty much
this
is what it's going to be. This is all right.
Well, and there's also one of the things that I think is hardest to convince young writers of is that every single emotional moment in your life is multi-layered, right? And so that if you're going to write, no matter what you're writing about in fiction, the goal is to do justice to the full range and complexity of whatever emotion is being felt at an emotional moment. So a simple example is, your daughter gets married. You are thrilled, of course, for her, but you've also lost a daughter. So, a moment like that, a man is turning 50 and he's been married for a good while now. This is going to be his wife for the rest of his life, and there's all the beauty of the choices that he has made are hopefully present in that moment, right alongside all the beauty, all the loss of the choices that he hasn't made.
Well, you have two stories in which there are young women whose father has divorced her mother, and they are both one is Smash and Grab, and the other is Our Lady of the Roses. One of those young women does badly with her father's divorce. The other one seems to be handling it quite well. So you have husbands who have been probably unfaithful, and in any case, divorced and remarried. Then you have the story of the unfaithful wife and the angry husband. I've forgotten the name of this story.
Grand Old Party is the
GOP,
right.
right. Grand Old Party. He finds out and he chases her down with a
Shotgun.
shotgun. All right. The story ends, and I want to know.
You're not going to ask, does he shoot or does he not shoot? Or you can't. I'm not answering
when
that
I
question.
turn the page. I know that you don't want me to know, but I stared at that for a while, and I was trying to get a tone from his stream of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
When that door opens, is he going to kill him or not? I know you're going to.
Are you asking me if?
I know you're going to tell me you don't know, but
You know, the truth is, I wrote that ending both ways, where
sure.
the door opens and he shoots him, and the door
Yeah.
opens and he doesn't shoot him,
Right.
and so and neither of them seemed honest to me. Neither of them worked. Neither was quite true, despite lots of drafts, and so I, like you do, I backed the story up and was looking for that tone. And there's a line earlier, just a couple paragraphs earlier, where the line is something like. He thought of all those quiet hours that had seemed to him like peace. How was it possible that he failed to recognize her discontent, right? Or you thought of it's a second person story. But so, and it seemed to me that line had sort of finished the emotional work of the story, right? The protagonist had gotten to the emotional place that he needed to be. So in terms of the plot, I didn't feel quite as guilty
And
not
now-
getting to the end of the...
But once he's realized that he should have noticed more,
Yeah.
he is less likely to kill the other
I
man.
agree.
And the other man, by the way, is so cool. I mean, this crazy husband is running around with a shotgun, and he said, "No, this really won't do. We should."
I'm a staunch advocate of the Second Amendment, he says,
Yes,
in the
but
face of a
don't kill
shotgun.
me.
Right, exactly.
No, there's a little humor in that, and I appreciated it. I was tickled the most of all the stories. I love Smash and Grab, but that's a hard story to talk about because it's plotty. But The King of Dauphin Island knocked me out because I just thought this is wonderful. The sixth richest man in the state of Alabama loses his wife. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he loses his mind, but he is slightly unbalanced, and he decides to do what?
He tries to buy the entirety of Dauphin Island, which, if people don't know, is a barrier island off the coast where I vacationed as a kid and still take my kids. And he wants to sort of knock down all the houses, restore the beaches, and turn it into a kind of fortress of solitude, basically. A place where he can be alone with his grief, to live, with his grief.
Would he really tear down all the buildings?
In my imagining, he's dead serious. I mean, my conception of him is that he is dead serious about his plans. But as you know in the story, he's sort of thwarted by his two grown daughters in achieving this goal. But in my imagining, that's his plan.
Well, I was with him. I was with him all the way, and I think they're mistaken. I don't think he's lost his mind. I think he has developed a peculiar obsession, but I don't think he's crazy. Although they finally find him non compos mentis, or he chooses to settle that he is.
It's funny when I wrote that story. I always give my wife early drafts of fiction. She's a terrific reader, a smart lady, but she's not a writer, and so her view of a story is less crafty and more like, did she like the story? Did she not like the story? And she was furious at me for not letting him get to buy Dauphin Island and letting him and having him make the choice. To give up the quest. She was furious at me, and she said, this is why you're not famous. You keep making choices like this. So it's a better story, and he has to make that choice. It's a better story if he makes that choice.
There's a whimsical close to that story too, because Hurricane Raphael is approaching, and we know Dauphin Island is very vulnerable.
Oh yeah, Katrina split it in half.
It could be restored to its natural state without this man tearing down any buildings at all.
Yeah, absolutely.
The hurricane is in the first story, oil and water. No, not really. That's the oil spill.
There's a natural disaster there.
There's a natural, and then but you have the hurricane in King of Dauphin Island, and you have the hurricane in landfall at the end, and it's finally arrived. Mm-hmm. There are at least one character that recurs, and your publisher wants us to notice the hurricane, the female policeman, and a couple other things, and think of these as linked and novel-like.
Right.
I did not find that necessary as a reader. I thought the stories, although there were bits of material that you could say, this happens here, and it happens here, and it happens here. What about this whole business? Did you ever imagine this as a kind of a novel, or are these stories just genuinely, what they appear to me is discrete?
Well, the stories are certainly intended to stand alone and function as short stories. Though I will say, this is my third collection of stories.
Yes.
It's the first one in which pieces of it have been written with a larger whole in mind. Usually you write 12 or 15 stories, and then you start looking through these stories for thematic concerns that they might have in common, or a way to order them that might make for an interesting read.
Yes, right.
In this case, the novella at the end, the hurricane novella, was the first piece that was written.
Oh.
But it was like the exact wrong length for the publishing world, right? It was too short to publish by itself. It was too long for a magazine. So it sat in a drawer for a while until after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and I wrote that story. And it occurred to me relatively shortly thereafter that these characters lived in the same world and they might know each other. And so a couple of the stories, King of Dolphin Island included, were written with a sort of whole in mind. Though I agree, I mean, a great short story collection, there's often pressure put on writers of short stories to link things and to change material so that they'll fit together in a sort of novelistic tapestry. And I don't think a great short story is a great short story.
Sherwood Anderson in Winesburg, Ohio, ruined
for
everybody. I mean, it's now been just almost 100 years, and people are still talking about Winesburg, Ohio, and how these are interlinked stories, and isn't that brilliant? And I think Winesburg, Ohio may be, but I don't think this is a necessity. The story that does tie it up, even if you wrote it first, is Landfall.
Yeah.
Reading it, I think it's 108 pages in your in the format of Eveningland. Ray was shorter than that, and so it could have been a small novel, but it does tie up a lot of themes. It's the family dynasty, the hurricane, the son who takes over the family business, the son who doesn't.
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, there's a lot there. And I think one thing, from a writer's point of view, and then we'll get to the thematic stuff, that knowing that already existed gave me something to write toward in the other stories. You know what I mean? You sort of had in mind, this is how the book is going to end. So how can we shape these other stories to sort of tip forward toward this point? But yeah, I mean, I think there's so not only is there's, I think, a kind of motion toward decay, maybe that's not the right word, through the collection. There's a motion from youth to age, and we get all three generations that are represented in that last
There's a little
piece.
baby.
Yeah. And then there's also, I think, in a lot of the stories, the two stories about the young women in particular, but also in Landfall, there is, I think, maybe this is not particular to Southern culture or the culture of this tribe of Southerners, but there is addressed in the collection a sense of family expectation and the sort of burdens that expectation can place on the characters, and whether they are choosing to reject that expectation or accept that expectation.
Well, the two brothers, Angus takes over the business.
Right, he's the good son, quote
well,
unquote. Right?
He's at sea, he's saving the ship, the family owns a shipyard, and so on. The other son doesn't want to live in Mobile, and doesn't want the family business. He wants to live in the country.
He wants to get out from under that shadow.
Yes, he does, yes.
Though I think then suddenly, I don't know how much I should talk about the plot, but suddenly this thing happens, and he has to get home in a hurry with a storm bearing down on Mobile, and he sort of sees it as a last chance to do the right thing, not the right thing, but the thing that his parents would have wanted him to do.
He becomes the good son for those 2 days.
Those 2 days, exactly. Well, and even with the other son, the quote unquote good son, I mean, it's the choice that he has made puts him perpetually in the shadow of the patriarch of the family who is deceased, and it's a shadow that he's never going to get out from under, no matter how successful.
No, and the old timers at the company.
Yeah,
they're
telling him stories, and your dad was what a bigger man than you are than he is than you.
Yeah, you're all right, but boy,
that was a man.
He was really something.
Yeah, exactly.
That is a very satisfying long story. Could have been a short novel, doesn't need to be. We only have 2 minutes left, and I understand that you have another novel in draft.
I do, and it should be out next year or the year after, depending on Grove. And it is tentatively titled At Briarwood School for Girls. And nobody remembers this except for me, but do you remember in the mid-90s, the Disney Corporation tried to build an historical theme park in rural Virginia?
No.
Right up the road from the Manassas battlefield.
No.
And they never did. They were prevented in lots of ways, but the state of Virginia welcomed it for the employment opportunities and that kind of thing. And so this novel is set at an all-girls boarding school in rural Virginia, right on the edge of where the historical theme park would be. So it's a boarding school novel, but it's backdropped by this sort of larger national and political thing that's happening with the Disney.
And is there a Civil War aura to it?
Well, it's set it's set in they take a field trip to Manassas battlefield.
Sure,
it's set in the
sure.
1990s, so it's historical only in that sense. But one of it's I think maybe 8 point of view characters. One of whom is a history teacher who is constantly talking about this thing happened at this place and this revolutionary. I mean, Virginia. My wife is a Virginian, and they, especially in that part of Virginia near Manassas, they don't only define their history according to the Civil War. The Revolutionary War is just as big for those people,
Bigger and better.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
so.
I'm looking forward to it, and
Well,
this has been fun. Thank you.
Thank you for
coming
having me.
in.
It's been great.
It's been
Thank
a
you.
pleasure.